They said he had hands made for violence, though he never once struck a man. His name was Davin, son of a wheelwright and midwife, born in a village so small no map bothered to name it. As a boy, he had stared into the mouths of furnaces the way others stared into the face of God, with awe and quiet terror. By 15, he was apprenticed to the blacksmith of Volstein, a gruff Saxon with one eye and no patience. Davin learned quickly, iron had moods, and steel could sing. A blade was not shaped by hammer alone, but by listening. Always listening. It was during these years that the war came. The king, whose name was whispered more in curses than in prayer, demanded blades. Not swords for knights, but crude weapons for boys too young to shave. Steel flowed from Volstein's forge like blood from a wound. Davin worked 12 hours a day. He dreamed of embers. He woke with his palms blistered and his mind oddly quiet. And then, the order came. A noble, unnamed, cloaked in royal seal, sent word from the capital. He required a weapon of permanence. Not one for a battlefield, but for a moment. One blade, to be used once, but which would be remembered long after every banner burned. A symbol, they said. An ending. Davin was chosen. The master smith had grown too ill, his lungs ash from decades of breathing iron. And Davin. Davin's work was precise, too precise for a boy who had never held a sword in battle. As though his hands knew death, though he did not. The nobles sent the materials, or blacker than night, rumored to come from the fallen star of Osherim. It hissed when placed in flame, and refused to bend unless sung to. And Davin sang. Not with words, but with his breath, with silence between each strike, with the rhythm of his heartbeat and the strange stillness in his veins. The forge glowed blue as he worked. Days passed, and he did not speak. When it was done, the blade was thinner than most, but long, graceful, dark as old wine, and hungry. It felt cold, even in firelight. He named it nothing. It did not want a name. The noble returned, this time in person. A man draped in white with a voice like polished bone. He lifted the blade and smiled like one who'd found the edge of prophecy. This will end something, he said. Beautifully. He left without paying. Davin did not ask. The silence was already payment enough. They say the soul can cling to things that objects remember. A child's doll. A saint's tooth. A sword. No one knows what makes a weapon cursed. It is not blood alone. It is intention, sharpened into metal, cooled in grief. Davin did not know what the sword would be used for. But he felt something shift as it left his hands, not in the world, but in time itself. As though a note had been struck, far off, and the echo would outlive them all. He stopped forging after that. No more blades. Only horseshoes, nails, chains. But late at night, when the wind turned east, he could hear it, the faint ring of steel meeting bone, over and over, and never ending. The sword passed hands only once, and that once was enough. It was not meant for battle. Not for defense. It was made for ceremony, the quiet kind, where no hymns are sung and no cheers rise, only silence that follows a death too important for mourning. The man who bore it, Lord Howrick of Grieve, was not a hero. He was, instead, a signal. Chosen by royal decree, clad in white, his duty was not to fight, but to mark the death of rebellion. The rebellion itself had lasted mere weeks. A cluster of lords in the western marches had raised banners against the crown. Their armies were small, their arguments old, taxes, titles, divine right, and their end swift. But among them was a name that frightened the court more than armies ever did. Lady Sorrell of Kelmarch. Not noble by blood, but by fire. A widow who rallied the poor. A woman who spoke as if the earth itself answered her. No child, no soft beauty, but a figure carved from the same stone as saints and wolves. The king did not fear her sword. He feared her voice. And so came the purpose of the unnamed blade, not to kill, but to erase. It was forged for her neck, and her silence. In the square of Velmora, before a crowd that did not cheer, Lord Howrick stood with the black sword in hand. Lady Sorrell knelt. She did not flinch. It is said she looked up at the sky, not as if searching for God, but as if reminding him. Then the sword fell. It did not cut. It severed. Without resistance, without sound. As though flesh had agreed to depart itself. And for a moment, the crowd did not breathe. Not out of horror, but because they heard something. No voice. Not thunder. Just, the sound of something remembering itself. They buried her body. They burned her name. But the sword was taken back to the capital, locked in a vault beneath the Hall of Seal. The court believed the matter closed. It was not. That winter, Lord Howrick fell ill. No fever. No wound. Simply, silence. He stopped speaking. Then stopped walking. Then stopped waking. His body remained warm. His eyes, open. But he never again responded to word, touch, or prayer. The healers called it catalepsy. The priests called it possession. But Davin, who heard the tale through frightened merchants, called it something else. Memory. The sword had remembered him. And through Howrick, it had begun to spread. Within months, his youngest son drowned in his own blood, no wound found. A maid hanged herself, raving about dreams of black water. The family name withered. Within 2 years, the house of Grieve had collapsed into ash and madness. And the sword remained, untouched, locked beneath stone and wax seals. It should have ended there. But curses do not rest in iron. They rest in story. Davin aged with the guilt of a man who had never sinned, but still bore the cross. He never took wife or child. Never left the village. His hands no longer made anything that could wound. He sharpened no blade. He sang no forge songs. But at night, he sat beside the cold anvil and whispered to it. Not apologies. Just, names. Names of those he'd heard had died strangely. Names of towns that turned barren. Names of children born with shadows behind their eyes. Somehow, he knew the sword had never stopped. It had only grown quieter. There are objects that hold the shape of sorrow long after the flesh forgets. The sword had been made for death, not just to cause it, but to give it shape. To assign it ritual. Precision. Meaning. But death, once named, begins to listen. And when it listens too long, it starts to answer. We forge our own curses, not through hatred, but through craft. Davin had not made a sword. He had made a moment that could not end. The blade had been sealed in stone, and the names of those it touched scrubbed from memory. But curses are not buried, they are inherited. 3 decades passed. The war was long forgotten, and even the name of Lady Sorrell was no longer spoken in courts or churches. A new king wore the crown. The capital gleamed with fresh banners. But far from marble halls, in villages where bells cracked and crops failed without reason, the whispers had returned. They spoke of children who did not cry when born. Children who looked through people, not at them. Children who woke with their palms burned, and no fire in the room. One such child was Esme, daughter of a thatcher and a candlemaker in the village of Vere. She was small and soft-spoken, with hair pale as new ash and a gaze too old for 10 years. She did not laugh. She did not fear wolves. She spoke rarely, but when she did, her words came like frost, quiet, still, and somehow already finished. By 7, she had drawn a sword in the dirt, a long, dark shape. When her father asked her what it was, she replied, "It's the sound that sleeps under the floor." They began to notice her dreams. She would wake screaming, her hands clutched around something that wasn't there, black, sharp, and cold. She called it, the breath that cuts. And she was not alone. In the mountain village of Erlen, twin boys were found sleepwalking in the snow, barefoot, eyes closed. They whispered the same word over and over: bend, strike, cool, silence. A rhythm. A forging. In southern hamlets, girls born of different bloodlines drew the same symbol in charcoal and chalk, a line through a circle, crossed by 3 notches. The same mark etched, long ago, into the hilt of an unnamed sword. None of these children knew the name Davin, nor Sorrell, nor Grieve. But the blade remembered them. And it had begun to shape them, not into soldiers, but into echoes. Curses do not spread like fire. They move like hunger, quiet, contagious, and without reason. The church called these children marked. The nobility called them mad. But neither could explain the similarities, the drawings, the sleep words, the stillness in their eyes. And beneath it all, a new fear began to grow. What if the curse was not vengeance, but creation? What if the sword had not been a blade of ending, but of beginning? By now, Davin was an old man. His beard was white, his back bent. His forge was long cold. But he had begun to write. One letter, over and over, to no one in particular, on rough parchment, folded and sealed with soot. The ink was faded. The words few. I made it. I did not name it. I did not bless it. But it remembers me, and so it remembers itself. The metal was dead. I awoke it. And now it sings to children in their sleep. I was never a killer. But I am a maker. And makers are the most dangerous kind. He hid these letters under stones. In hollow trees. Between floorboards. As if scattering truth could dilute it. But nothing diluted the pull of the blade. The past does not sleep. It waits, not in books, but in blood. What we do with our hands survives long after we are dust. And sometimes, the most innocent act, the shaping of steel, the silence of obedience, becomes the wound others must carry. Esme would grow into a woman who could speak without sound. The twins would disappear at 15, leaving only a ring of ash. Others would follow, not as a cult, nor an army, but as a scattered people bound by something they did not choose. A generation without cause, but with memory. Memory that did not belong to them. But lived through them. There are cities that are built on rivers. Others are built on gold. But the capital, Velderin, was built on forgetting. It had towers taller than grief and plazas wider than justice. Its marble was white not by nature, but by command. Statues stood where gallows once were. Gardens bloomed where pyres had burned. No monument bore the name Sorrell. No plaque mentioned the sword. The chamber where it was kept, far beneath the citadel, sealed in lead and salt, had no door. No key. Only silence. And yet, the city heard it. Not all at once. Not like thunder. But like a hunger. It began with the archivists. 3 of them, in separate wings of the royal scriptorium, began waking at the same hour, just before dawn, whispering the same phrase, which none of them remembered by daylight. Bend. Strike. Cool. Forget. Their hands trembled when they touched iron. 2 began refusing to handle ink. 1 carved strange symbols into the spines of books, the same hilt mark Davin had once etched with his bare hands. Next came the masons. Stonelayers working near the southern bastion found their tools breaking more often. But not by fault. They shattered when brought close to the foundation, as if refusing to chisel further. They began to hear music from the walls. Low, metallic hums. Rhythmic. Familiar. Not melodies, but forging patterns. One described it as a lullaby made of breath and pressure. Another as the heartbeat of buried iron. They laughed about it, until the youngest mason, a boy of 13, placed his ear to the wall and said only, "It wants to be held again." He vanished the next day. All they found was a palm-shaped scorch on the wall, black and perfect. People of power live under the illusion that history is a line, that what passes stays behind, and what lies ahead is new. But in Velderin, history had begun to breathe again. It moved through stone, through air, through the very soundlessness of the sword's chamber, a silence so dense that, with time, it began to press outward. The priests called it heresy. The chancellors, madness. But none could explain why their children now drew black blades in the dirt. Or why the marble began to crack in the throne room, always at night. Always near the king's chair. Or why every mirror in the palace began to darken from the center outward, like steel remembering flame. One night, a historian named Thessan, not noble but beloved for his precision, uncovered a banned manuscript in the cellar of the cathedral. It bore no title. Its parchment smelled faintly of coal and rose oil. Its first line read, "The sword was not forged to kill. It was forged to mark. What it touches, it names. What it names, it keeps." He did not sleep that night. By morning, he had copied it by hand 7 times and sent it to 7 corners of the kingdom. But only 2 copies survived. The rest, burned. Not by fire. But by heatless black, a curling, silent corrosion that left no ash. When Thessan was found, he had no wounds. No sign of struggle. Only a single word carved into his desk, not by knife, but by fingertip. Unmade. We build cities to rise above the mud, to forget that we are shaped by earth and blood and iron. But the sword was not forged to be remembered. It was forged to remember us. And so long as men build palaces atop the graves of those they silence, the iron below will never rest. Curses do not chase us. They wait. They become architecture. And when the moment is right, they sing again. The forge had gone cold. For nearly 50 years, no flame had touched the anvil in Davin's old hut. Ivy wrapped its beams like veins over bone. Birds nested in the chimney. Rain came and left, and no smoke ever rose. But blood does not die with the man. Davin had no sons. No daughters he claimed. But in the shadow of the mountains, far from the city that now trembled in its pride, a boy was born with his hands clenched around nothing, as though already grasping a hilt. The mother, Letha, spoke little of the father. Only that he was a traveler, lean and quiet, with silver in his beard and black beneath his nails. The boy she named Kalen. He did not weep when born. His first breath came not as a cry, but as a long, drawn hiss, as though his lungs remembered smoke. By 5, he watched the blacksmiths with still, sharp eyes. By 8, he mimicked their work with sticks and stones, and made edges that cut. By 10, he found the forge. Not by chance. Not by map. He simply walked into the forest one morning and followed the air. He said it smelled like memory. And there it was, Davin's ruin. Dust and rust. The ghosts of iron long worked. But Kalen stepped over the threshold like a prince returning to a fallen throne. He did not ask permission. He lit the forge. There was no teacher. No master. Only heat. Only steel. And the rhythm, a rhythm that came not from sound, but from inside his skin. Bend. Strike. Cool. Forget. The hammer was heavy. But his arms did not shake. The iron, scavenged from rusted wheels and old plows, bent as though welcoming him. And within days, the forest changed. Birds stopped nesting. Foxes stayed far. The wind would not enter. Letha begged him to stop. She said the walls whispered at night. That his name echoed twice when she called him. That her dreams were filled with metal breathing. But Kalen only smiled and said, "I'm not making a sword." He wouldn't say what it was. But the sound of it, that ancient, layered rhythm, began to leak into the valley. Villagers felt it behind their ears. Children began to hum without knowing why. And once, under a red moon, a tree cracked in half from root to crown with no wind at all. One night, as Kalen worked, a voice spoke from the forge. Not loud. Not outside. Inside. A voice without tone. Without name. But it said, "You are not the first to hold the hammer. But you may be the last." Kalen did not stop. He spoke back, not in words, but in will. He did not ask who the voice was. He already knew. It was not the sword. Not the curse. It was the shape of purpose. The memory of making. The part of Davin that never died. The part that never wanted peace. Creation is the first violence. Before the sword, before the war, before the curse, there was the choice to shape something. To reach into silence and pull out a sound no one asked to hear. Davin forged without knowing. Kalen forges because he knows, and does not flinch. We fear monsters who destroy. But the real danger is the one who creates. With a steady hand. A quiet heart. And no regrets. The hammer rings again. The silence cracks. The shape is returning. And this time, it will not hide beneath the earth. It will step forward. Cities burn loud. But they fall quietly. No trumpets sound when memory returns. No fanfare welcomes what the world tried to bury. The day Kalen entered Veldarin, the sky did not darken. The bells did not stop. Only one thing changed. The wind shifted. It came not from the east, as it always had, but from the south, from the ruins of forgotten fires, where rebellion once died and a sword was born without a name. Kalen walked as if summoned, though no one had called him. Not by voice. But by absence. Something missing in the city had left a shape in him. He walked through markets and gardens, courtyards and corridors. No guard stopped him. No doors closed. No one asked who he was. Not because they saw him. But because they felt him. Like a shadow cast before light. When he reached the palace, the mirrors cracked without touch. The throne split beneath its cushions. And far below, sealed in the chamber that had not been opened in half a century. The sword pulsed. Still unnamed. Still hungry. Still waiting. It had rusted, not on the surface, but in memory. Its edge dulled not by time, but by neglect. It had forgotten what it was. Until Kalen's hand touched it. And in that moment, the sword remembered itself. But it did not glow. It did not shimmer. It did not scream. It breathed. And Kalen breathed with it. He did not raise it. He did not strike. He simply whispered the words burned into the rhythm of his blood. Bend. Strike. Cool. Remember. And the curse broke. But not as they hoped. Steel can rust. Wood can rot. Flesh can burn. But ideas survive. The curse had never been the weapon. It had always been the shape. The idea of silence as justice. Of order made by erasure. Of peace born through fear. When Kalen reforged the blade, he didn't make a tool. He made a voice. And it spoke, not in words, but in acts. The palace fell that year, not to war, but to forgetting. The king was found days later, wandering the wine cellars, whispering the name Sorrell to the rats. Children across the kingdom began carving blades into bark, into stone, into each other's dreams. The rhythm spread, not as prophecy, but as recognition. In Davin's old forge, long buried in moss and root, the walls split open. The earth underneath pulsed like a second heart. And in the centuries to come, no historian could say when the rebellion restarted. Because it didn't. It had never ended. Curses do not end when the blade breaks. They end when we change the shape of what we believe deserves to be made. Davin was not evil. He was not holy. He was a man who listened too carefully to meddle. But in doing so, he forged more than a sword. He forged a door. And once opened, even in silence, such doors do not close. He never gave the sword a name. Because it already had one. Us.
Like and subscribe to this channel for more interesting stories.